Hi everyone. Today we have an absolutely shocking story that recently landed in my inbox from a guy who swears he's on the run in the Alaskan interior. He refused to give his last name but included one chilling line: "Share this if I disappear." We're talking hidden fences in the middle of nowhere, a hum that rattles your ribs, and something with more eyes than any living thing should have. So grab your coffee, double-check the deadbolt, and keep your finger off the skip button, because once you hear Trevor's story, you'll understand why the less you can verify, the scarier it gets. I'm Trevor, skipping the last name for obvious reasons. Late last fall, right before sunrise, I was in the middle of Alaska, a solid hour from the nearest gas pump and nowhere near cell service. The weather that week was forgettable. Cold, clear, normal. Nothing out there can really back up or shoot down what I'm about to tell you. My buddy Wes and I were after caribou. We left his pickup on a dirt pull-off along a highway almost nobody uses before breakfast. Wes has a bad ankle, so he limped along behind me while I pushed ahead. Maybe 100 yards in, the woods should have been silent, but I felt this steady hum in my chest, like standing next to a big transformer. I shut off my headlamp and saw an orange glow flickering through the trees. My offline map showed nothing but public land, yet there it was, an 8-foot fence topped with razor wire that looked brand new. Down low, someone had bent a flap just wide enough for a person to crawl through. My gut told me to back out, but that hum felt like it was pulling me in. I dropped to the ground and slid underneath. Inside, a fresh gravel road dove into a new cut in the hill. Dust hung in the beam of my light. Off to one side sat a half-buried metal shed and 2 unmarked trucks, engines still ticking as they cooled. I was halfway toward the cut when something skittered between the trucks. The creature was taller than a man but moved on all fours, skin the gray of a saltwater fish, limbs bending the wrong way at the joints. It lifted its head and I saw 4 dull amber eyes, 2 over 2, blinking out of sync. Before I could decide whether to run or shoot, the thing vanished behind the shed. A siren blared, 2 harsh notes, then silence. The hum died and the sudden quiet made my ears ring. I spun toward the fence, but the opening was already cinched shut with fresh wire ties. Footsteps crunched on gravel. I dropped behind a fallen log and killed the light. 2 figures in winter white walked past, rifles slung low. One of them said they'd lost the specimen near the north side, and that lethal force was allowed only if they crossed paths with a civilian. That civilian was me. I didn't breathe until their footsteps faded. With the fence sealed, the only way out was down the gravel road. The hillside swallowed the road behind thick steel doors left jammed open by a dented drum. I slipped inside. The passage was lit by harsh white strips. No cameras I could see, just tiny sensors blinking green. A cross corridor soon opened into a cavern big enough to swallow a house. Shipping containers lined one wall. A whiteboard leaned against a crate full of dates and genetic jargon about Arctic tolerance and stress suppression. The words escape and host were underlined in red. Every hair on my neck stood up. Then I heard it breathing, wet, uneven pulls of air. I ducked behind a container. The creature loped into view. Up close, its skin looked frost-burned and almost see-through. Gills fluttered along its ribs. Each of its 4 eyes roamed separately, scanning the rafters and the floor at the same time. 3 people in the same winter gear hurried in, holding cattle prod poles that cracked with blue electricity. One of them hit a switch on the wall grid. The concrete floor flashed with arcs. The creature shrieked, metallic, like rebar scraping ice, then ran straight up the wall and clung there like an insect. I ran. I don't remember turning corners, just the taste of stale air and the thump of my boots. A ladder climbed to a hatch overhead. I tossed my pack, scrambled up, and spun the wheel. Thankfully, it turned. I crawled onto open tundra at first light. The hum started again beneath my feet, quieter now, deeper underground. A dark, unmarked helicopter rose beyond the tree line and swung my way. I belly crawled into muskeg, cold water soaking my legs. The chopper circled twice with its spotlight raking the ground, then broke away toward the south. When I got back to the highway hours later, the pickup was gone. Drag marks showed it had been loaded onto something heavy. No broken glass, no debris, just the truck's fluid stain on the dirt. I walked the shoulder to the nearest convenience store, hoping Wes had called in a tow. The attendant, a teenager in a faded hoodie, said a flatbed with no company name had hauled a gray truck north earlier. He figured it was a repo. After coffee at the only diner in town, I noticed two clean-cut men in brand new outdoor gear, with pale wristbands where watches had been. They sat at a booth without ordering, eyes fixed on me. I left cash on the counter and stepped outside. They followed. I ducked behind the hardware store and watched them talk quietly into throat mic earpieces. One said they had eyes on the hunter, but no sign of the partner. The other answered that they still had permission to detain. I caught a ride south with a vegetable truck, then stayed on back roads to my off-grid cabin. The doorframe was splintered. Everything inside was tossed. My laptop was gone, and someone had shredded every photo that showed my face. A large envelope waited on the table. Inside were my handheld GPS, wiped clean, a photo of me crawling under that fence, and a single sheet of legal threats. If I didn't sign and return the paper within 2 days, it said, I'd face charges that could keep me in prison for decades. Calls to Wes went straight to a full mailbox. When I drove to his place, I saw the living room rug rolled up through the front window and a dark smear on the hardwood. Getting the police involved was pointless. Any real report would vanish before it was filed. I tried posting audio of the whiteboard and the creature's scream to a conspiracy forum. The clip disappeared in minutes and my account was banned. My phone lost service soon after, even though the router lights in my cabin kept blinking. A couple of nights later, I motored down a nearby river, trying to slip out unnoticed. My spotlight swept the bank and caught 4 amber dots, 2 pairs of eyes stacked. The creature crouched in water up to its ribs, gills pulsing, its head tilting like a dog sizing up a stranger. It never chased. It just watched me drift by. I crossed into Canada under fog, stashed my sled, and hiked into a sleepy mining town. I bought a burner phone, but every call ended with the same restricted network error. Later that week, someone tried to force my motel door during a false fire alarm. They retreated the moment they heard me rack around. Fresh boot prints in the hallway matched the ones I'd seen back at the fence. Days later, a thumb drive appeared in a post office box I'd opened under a fake name. The only file was grainy footage of that creature climbing a tree at dawn, the exact time I'd surfaced from the tunnel. Someone inside wants this out but can't risk sending more. Here's what I've pieced together, though I can't back any of it with paperwork. A hidden research outfit deep in Alaska is blending cold weather animal traits with human genetics to build something that can live where we can't. One of their prototypes got loose, people died, and the project keeps rolling because it sits behind layers of secrecy nobody questions. The missile fields and radar domes tourists photograph are just window dressing. The real work happens underground where maps show nothing. It's now early May, more than a year since that first encounter. Every new town I settle in, 2 polite men with outdoor jackets and empty coffee cups appear within a week. They never haul me away, but they always leave another unsigned agreement under my door. Last Thursday, I woke to wet breathing outside my basement window. 4 amber eyes blinked once in the streetlight before the thing slipped into the storm drain. The city welded extra bars over the grate the next morning. No explanation. While you're reading this, something may have finally got me. Either the suits or the specimen. I left lots of info on an encrypted drive. Coordinates where I found the hatch are on the drive. The GoPro battery is sealed in a waterproof case under the third culvert west of that spot, 2 feet down. If you can somehow find them, tell Wes's family I tried. If you ever hunt central Alaska and the ground starts to vibrate with a deep drone that makes your teeth itch, leave your gear and run. I have to hit send. The connection light is blinking and something metallic just scraped across the roof. Remember, this sounds insane only because the checkable details are gone, but it is honestly exactly how it happened. I know you usually get accounts about all sorts of weird sightings, but something happened here at Granite Park Chalet in Glacier National Park this past summer that I still can't fully wrap my head around. I'm the caretaker here for the season, stationed mostly from mid-June until late September, though I arrived earlier than usual this year to help with some repair projects left over from last season's wind damage. The silence of these mountains can be so deceptive. You think you're alone, but there's always something stirring just beyond the edge of your hearing. Anyway, it was around 5:15 in the morning. I remember checking my watch because I'd just finished brewing coffee and was considering making an early supply run down to the main trail before the first hikers arrived. The chalets up here, especially Granite Park, have a long history. Built by the Great Northern Railway in 1914, perched at about 660 feet overlooking the Swift Current Valley. Even when I'm exhausted, I'll take a moment to stare out at those jagged peaks emerging from the valley floor. That day, it was calm, just a light breeze, no rain or anything. The sun was barely creeping over the horizon, so I had that faint dawn glow to see by. I stepped outside onto the small deck area we use to watch for incoming hikers. Usually, I'm scanning the area for mountain goats. There's a small herd that likes to slog around the slopes near the chalet, or the occasional black bear rummaging around if it's hungry enough. I notice a strange shape moving on the scree field below the ridgeline that leads up toward Heaven's Peak. At first, I thought it might be a wolverine because of how low to the ground it seemed, but something about the movement was off. It looked too gaunt, too elongated. That was enough to make me grab my binoculars from inside. I keep them stored next to the window, so it only took me a few seconds to run in and back out. Through the binoculars, I got a clearer view. This wasn't a bear or a goat or anything that belonged on these mountains. It was a pale figure, definitely on all fours, but elongated arms, like if a person crawled on hands and feet with their belly close to the ground. I could see its ribs, even at a distance. It was that skinny. The other part that threw me off was how fast it moved, like it would slink forward in a jerky motion, then pause stock still, kind of scanning the area. The sun was still weak, but enough light reflected off its skin that I'm positive it was hairless or near hairless. I half worried I was looking at some severely injured or starved person, maybe a lost hiker or something in dire trouble. You do hear about folks getting stranded out there, dehydrated and wasting away, but that notion evaporated pretty quickly when I saw the angle of its joints. The arms were reversed in a way, or the elbows jutted at an odd angle I can't even properly describe. No human arms bend like that, at least not in any normal configuration. This thing was creeping down the slope, heading toward a patch of stunted pine that sits on the trail leading out toward the 50 Mountain campground. Out here, the Park Service is pretty strict about backcountry permits, so the only reason I even considered it might be a person at first was the bizarre injuries you see sometimes. People can do desperate things when lost. But as I continued watching, I got this sudden chill, like an instant wave of dread. It's not something I experience often, even in tough conditions. The mountains can be harsh, but they follow a sort of natural logic. Storms roll in, wildlife hunts or hibernates, that kind of thing. This was outside that logic. I could see the spine of the thing ridging up every time it scrunched forward. Its head was sort of triangular, or maybe it was just the angle of how it was crawling. Hard to be sure. It wasn't shaped like a typical skull. At one point, It stopped and lifted its head like it was sniffing the air. There was a definite impression of intelligence, or at least heightened awareness, which made me even more uneasy. When it finally disappeared into the pines, I actually found myself hesitating to even go back inside. Instead, I stood there, binoculars clutched in my hands, scanning every possible route it might take. This is bear country, so I keep a radio on me that connects me directly to the park's dispatch. I thought about calling it in, but how do you report something that you can't even classify? Even if I just said there's a strange, possibly injured individual, they'd have me describing it in detail. And what was I supposed to say? That it looked too skinny to be human, with reversed joints? It sounded crazy in my own head. I couldn't sit still, so I ended up pacing around the deck, trying to rationalize it. I started thinking back to some offhand stories I'd heard from an older caretaker who used to work at Sperry Chalet decades ago. She mentioned folks talk about figures or shapes in the high country that vanish without a trace, usually chalked up to illusions in the early morning fog or just stress from the altitude. You hear local lore about wendigos or strange mountain spirits, but I'd always dismissed those as campfire legends. It's easy to disbelieve until you see something that just doesn't line up with reality. The rest of the morning was tense. I half expected to see it creeping around the chalet itself. Normally, I'd do a walk around the perimeter to check for damage or signs of predator activity, but I stayed put for a long time, just scanning with binoculars. Then I caught sight of a group of early hikers making their way up from the loop trail below. I debated whether to warn them, but what would I even say? Instead, I just watched them trudging along in a single file line, completely oblivious to the ridge. They got close to the stretch of pines where I last saw that figure, and I swear my heart was in my throat. Nothing happened, though. They made it through without so much as a sideways glance. Later, I couldn't stop thinking about it. During the midday lull, I found myself going out a few hundred yards beyond the chalet, keeping my bear spray at the ready, looking for footprints or any sign something had been there. The ground out in that scree field is mostly loose rock, so it's not like footprints show up well, but I did see a few scuff marks that looked like something had scraped along the surface, not quite typical of a four-legged animal. Makes me wonder if it was digging its hands, if you can even call them that, into the gravel to keep balance on the slope. For the next week or so, I found myself losing a lot of sleep over this. Often, I'd wake up around dawn, feeling an urge to look out the windows. Part of me was convinced it would be perched on a rock somewhere, staring back at me, or maybe pressed up against the glass. I started thinking maybe I should bring it up with the rangers in a more roundabout way, like, hey, have there been any unusual sightings or missing hikers we need to be aware of? But I'd be too afraid they'd think I was playing a joke or losing it out here. Nothing else strange happened for a while, although I started noticing the local wildlife being more skittish than usual. The goats that normally linger near the chalet seemed to stay farther down the slope, almost like they were avoiding that entire ridgeline. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that's how it felt. And I remember hearing a weird echo one evening, well after the sun had set. A high-pitched noise carried on the wind. Could have been an eagle, but maybe not. Sometimes the environment here warps sounds in unexpected ways. I've had plenty of nights alone in remote cabins, so I'm not one to jump at ghosts, but that sighting changed something for me. I'm more aware now that there might be things in these mountains we can't neatly categorize. Could it have been a severely deformed bear with mange, or a human with extreme health issues? Possibly. But that doesn't account for the way it moved. I can still picture it loping down the slope like it belonged out there, completely comfortable in that environment despite looking so impossibly fragile. My mind keeps going back to those protruding ribs and the unnatural length of its limbs. I guess I'm writing this because I need to tell somebody who won't laugh it off. The rangers, well, they've got enough to worry about without investigating something intangible like this, and I don't have any hard evidence. Just that memory burned into my brain. I'm not sure if I should be relieved that I never caught sight of it again, or if I should be worried it's still out there, moving around at dawn, coming closer than we realize. When the season ended, I left with an odd mixture of relief and regret, wondering if coming back next year might bring more clarity or just more questions. I've been living up here in the Adirondacks for a little over 6 years now, since retiring from the mechanics shop I ran in Lake George. I had saved up enough to get this small hunting cabin near the outskirts of Keene, and I always figured I'd spend my golden years enjoying the mountains, taking walks in the woods whenever the mood hit me. Never really thought I'd end up writing about something like this, especially for a YouTube channel, but I can't keep it to myself anymore. It's too strange, and I'm sure someone else out there will either confirm I'm not crazy or at least find some meaning in it. I was out scouting for early season trout spots just after the ice gave way in late March. Found a few good streams near the east branch of the Ausable River that I wanted to check once the water warmed up. I've got this habit of roaming around, sometimes wandering off old logging roads, scoping out anything interesting left behind from the forestry days. I've stumbled onto remnants of old fire watch towers, rusted out trucks, wooden huts used by rangers in the 1960s, that sort of thing. Mostly nothing of consequence, just historical curiosities. Anyway, one drizzly morning I was following a tributary that runs parallel to the river, just to see if there were any trout moving upstream, when my dog Sam, he's an older husky mix, started pacing back and forth along this rocky hillside. I assumed at first he'd caught wind of some squirrel or raccoon, but he kept sniffing around this small opening in the rock face, like a crevice or maybe an old mine shaft, except it looked more natural than anything man-made. I called Sam back, and for a moment, I got the weirdest chill. It's not that it was cold, just an odd feeling that something about that opening was off. I decided to step in a few feet to see how far it went. Sam followed close behind as usual, but after about 10 feet, he started whining. That dog never does that. He's got nerves of steel during the thunderstorms up here. He just sat down right at the entrance, wouldn't budge. So I patted him, told him he could stay put, and I kept going, figuring if I didn't explore it, it'd nag at me for the rest of the day. It was a bit of a squeeze at first, the entrance tight between two slabs of rock. After maybe 12 yards, it opened up into a bigger chamber. My eyes were adjusting, and I used the flashlight on my phone to see. I nearly dropped the phone when I realized the walls were scratched up like something had been clawing them repeatedly, deep vertical grooves that seemed too high up to come from, say, a bear or anything smaller. They stretched from about waist level up to near the ceiling, and some of them were so deep I could fit a finger inside. I tried to tell myself it could just be natural rock formations or animals sharpening their claws, but it didn't feel that way. Then I bested my nerves enough to look around more carefully. I noticed what looked like old, dried grass, like a nest or bedding. The part that really caught my attention was this heat-scorched patch on the ground. The rock there was blackened, as if something had built a small fire. I looked around at the walls again, half expecting to see soot, but the charring was only in that one spot. Then I saw something else. Bones, small, delicate bones that might have belonged to rabbits, squirrels, various forest critters. They were arranged in a messy line, scattered but not random, if that makes sense. And I thought, well, maybe a fox or bobcat was making its home. But these bones showed signs of being snapped in half, like something bigger had fed on them. I can't say for sure if it was Bigfoot, but I've heard stories up here about folks seeing large, hairy creatures running along ridges at dusk. I always laughed it off as myth or too much whiskey by the fire. But here's the real kicker. Right near that bedding area, on a flatter area of rock, was what I'd call a handprint. Only it wasn't exactly like a human handprint. It was broader, with thicker fingers, and it looked pressed into the wall with surprising force. It was faint, like a muddy or greasy residue that had partially dried, but you could still make out 4 distinct digits. and maybe a thumb placed lower. Definitely wasn't shaped like a bear's paw or anything else I've seen out here. I remember hearing about that big scare in Whitehall back in the late 70s, where a few folks swore they had face-to-face run-ins with something huge and hairy besides the typical black bears roaming around. The local papers back then even gave it some coverage, and I was around Plattsburgh in the early 90s when folks claimed they'd spotted something near Lake Champlain that wasn't Champy, the local lake monster legend. But I'd never personally seen anything that made me question what's lurking in these woods until that moment. I actually thought about grabbing a snapshot with my phone, but the service was non-existent in that cave. No surprise there, and I was a little too rattled to be fiddling with the phone camera. My battery was also down to around 10%. Maybe that's a lame excuse. I just didn't want to be standing there too long. I felt this thick tension in the air, like I wasn't supposed to be in there at all. So I turned around and tried to leave quietly, stepping carefully so I wouldn't disturb anything. My foot slipped on the damp stone, kicked a few pebbles toward that bedding area, and the echo seemed too loud. I heard something faint deeper in the cave, like a grunt or a huff. Could have been air movement or maybe my panicked imagination, but that was enough for me. I got out of there. When I realized Sam was gone from the entrance, I panicked. Turned out he had run back up the slope, sitting near my old battered truck, tail between his legs. That dog never bolts on me, and the only times he's done anything close was when we encountered a black bear a couple of years ago near Tupper Lake. He wasn't quite this shaken even then. The next day, I stewed on what I'd seen, telling myself maybe I should go back with a real flashlight or a camera, maybe a couple of buddies from my old hunting group. But something in my gut warned me it could be dangerous if that place really was inhabited, and I started connecting the dots about the stories I'd been hearing around the local diners, how some folks near Saranac Lake had found strange footprints last fall, or how a man up near Lion Mountain swore he found a wooden structure in the forest that looked like a nest made of bent and woven saplings. I shrugged that stuff off before, but now I'm seeing it differently. I'm not looking for fame or trouble. Maybe that's why I'm contacting you. There's this feeling that I'm onto something bigger than an old hermit's hideout or an unusual bear den. I'll tell you this, I've got no reason to lie, and I barely had the nerve to tell my cousin, who's a ranger over at Wilmington Notch. He said there have been hush-hush calls about weird sightings, mostly footprints in mud near some back trails, and that the state doesn't really investigate them publicly. Could be they don't want the influx of monster hunters tearing up the park. Could be something else. I don't know. Now every time I drive toward Lake Placid for groceries, I keep glancing at the tree lines, half expecting to see a figure crossing the road. I never do, but my head's on a swivel in a way it never was before. I can't quite get the image of that handprint out of my mind, and the bedding, with the bones. It was too deliberate and too big and too human-like in arrangement, for lack of a better term. I've seen how predators leave remains, and this felt different, though I can't articulate precisely why. I've been tempted to share the cave location with a couple of folks in town, but I don't want a circus. The Adirondacks are already a magnet for tourists, and the last thing we need is crowds stomping around in search of Bigfoot or whatever they think they'll find. I'm writing this in hopes that it might reach the right people, those who've seen something similar. I'm not trying to broadcast it publicly in every newspaper, but I figure your channel might be the right place for it. Days have turned into weeks, and I haven't worked up the courage to go back. When I look at Sam, it's like he remembers too. If dogs can have that kind of memory, who knows? He seems reluctant whenever I drive in that direction, like he can sense if we're getting near that hillside. I haven't spoken much about it to the locals because up here, you get pegged as a crazy old-timer in a hurry if you go around talking about giant, hairy creatures living in caves. Everyone's got their ghost stories and tall tales, but this is different. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. It's left me uneasy about venturing off the main trails alone. I've started wondering if there are more caves like this scattered around. This region is riddled with rocky outcroppings. It's entirely possible that pockets of forest remain practically untouched by humans for decades. Plenty of places to hide, especially if something knows these woods like the back of its hand. I'm still deciding if I want to put together a small group, just 1 or 2 people with good sense, real outdoorsy folks, not adrenaline junkies, and see if that cave is still active. Part of me hopes I was wrong, but if I wasn't, I want some confirmation that we're sharing these mountains with something we've never truly documented. If I do end up investigating again, I'll let you know what I find. That's all of it. I just wanted you to hear my account, as rambling and strange as it is. If it helps even one other person realize they aren't alone in experiencing something unexplainable out there, then maybe it's worth exposing myself to a bit of ridicule